And she had quite a bit to travel this morning. She had to travel 30 kilometers to get to us. Stephanie, thank you so much. And we are looking forward to your talk and everything you've got to tell us.
My PowerPoint is on the Amathole Museum as genealogical source. And I first of all want to thank you for the invitation to share my passion for the museum and the wonderful collection I'm privileged to curate. Working in the heritage field has become, as many of you are probably aware, increasingly difficult and at times rather overwhelming in terms of the challenges it represents. So doing this presentation was just such a wonderful experience because it reminded me of some of the smaller victories, as well as the immense satisfaction involved in working with such a treasured collection. So thank you for that opportunity. So as Alta mentioned, I am curator of history at the Amathole Museum, which is in Qonce, formerly King Williamstown. It's actually quite a nice name. It refers to the fact that Qonce means at the place of the buffalo. And we are situated on the N2 between East London and Grahamstown, now called Makanda. And you're all very welcome to visit and to send me an email if there's any connection with the Eastern Cape and with the town specifically. The aim for today, and the aim of today's paper, is to focus on the Amathole Museum, which was formerly called the Kafrarian Museum and was changed for obvious reasons, and to look at it as a valuable genealogical resource. And the good news is that access to our holdings is free. We do not charge for our services. And you can just send me an email at the end of the presentation, and yeah, I will certainly assist in trying to help you with your Eastern Cape inquiries. The history section of the Amathole Museum has been assisting clients with genealogical research since the 1960s. When I thus arrived in 1997, I found this cartoon strip on the notice board. I hope you are all enjoying it. It's from Red Eye. Unfortunately, I do not know the date or the publication, but you all know how much work it is to complete a family tree. I've recently completed an online course on research methodology at Rhodes University, where the concept of positionality, that is the idea that our social, historical, political location as researchers cannot be separated from the research itself. And this was discussed in some detail at the course. So applying my positionality and the fact that genealogical clients often ask about my family origins in a paper on genealogy can only mean that I need to introduce myself, however briefly, in terms of who my family is and therefore what my identity is. So I thought that should be good fun. Okay, so my maiden name was Pinar, and my father's, my grandmother was a Richter. So on the left, you can see an image of my grandparents' wedding. My grandfather was Jacques Hugo Pinaar, and he married Emilia Richter in 1939 at the Grote Kerk in Cape Town. And she was the daughter of Ernst Adolf Theodor Richter and Francine Viljoen. He came from Hamm in Germany, and this is his family. So that's my paternal strand. My maternal strand, my mother's maiden name was de la Harpe, and her mother was a Delpoort. And these are just interesting images from my point of view of anyway. My maternal great-grandparents was Philippus Petrus von Landsberg Delpoort. He was from Caledon, and he married Helena Katharina Delpoort. They're sitting on the left-hand side. He's obviously in the middle, and she's on his right. We called her Oma Baby. And same great-grandfather, Opa Flips, quite an interesting image from the family archives. The day after he shot the leopard on the family farm, and you can see his trusty hunting dogs at the back. So yeah, that's me. That's my family, just in a nutshell. These are the beautiful buildings of the Amathole Museum. This is where I've been working for the past 25 years. All 4 buildings are national monuments. The one at the top left is the original museum building. It's also the youngest of the 4. It was built in 1855. The 2 buildings on the right, top and bottom, was built in 1877. They were the public buildings of the town and now house our institution. And the one at the bottom left, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit today, was built in 1855. It is a satellite of the Amathole Museum. As Alta mentioned, the museum traces its origins to 1884 and is thus the 6th oldest museum in South Africa. We have 3 sections which we focus on: mammalogy, anthropology, and of course history. It's a local history museum focusing on the town and environs, but you will see today that it definitely has an Eastern Cape and as well as a bit of an African focus as well. Okay, so the history section in terms of genealogy focuses on 3 specific areas. First of all, the German settlers, then the Cape Mounted Riflemen, not rifles as many people refer to them. The correct term is Cape Mounted Riflemen, and Eastern Cape missionaries and missionary endeavors. So with your indulgence, I'd like to unpack each of these areas with you. So first of all, who were the German settlers? Between 1856 and 1859, some 4,000 German immigrants settled in the border area of the Eastern Cape, and they arrived in the following groups. The first rather interesting group was members of the British German Legion. They were recruited in Great Britain to fight in the Crimean War, but while they were still training, the war ended. So Great Britain was at a bit of a loss to what to actually do with all these soldiers. And so eventually they decided to send the Legion to South Africa as settlers. The verdict is not quite out as to how successful they were as settlers. About 50% of them eventually returned, especially when the Indian Mutiny broke out. Rather an interesting group as well, because many of them were unmarried, and there was a bit of a push to get them all married. And so there were mass marriages which occurred on the eve of embarkation, often conducted on the ship itself. More about that a little bit later as well. In addition, immigrants kept on coming. In 1877, 1883, the numbers of the original settlers were augmented by more settlers. And in fact, the latest research done by people like Keith Tankard and Gail Rothland is starting to show us that there were in fact waves of successive groups of settlers. Sometimes they were government sponsored, sometimes they were private groups who immigrated to the border. Watch this space. This is just a handmade map to give you an idea of the influence of the Germans on the geographical imprint, if you want, of the Germans, and why places like Frankfurt, Marienthal, Braunschweig, Berlin, Panmure, and Hamburg is now part of the Eastern Cape map. You will see that some of the areas look like they're lines of defense, and that was in fact so with the British German Legion, who first settled here. Sir George Grey, who was governor at the time, actually referred to the German settlements as a checkerboard of black and white. And clearly, seeing that the first group were settlers, the idea was that they would play a role in the defense in case of a frontier war breaking out. Okay, commemorating the German settlers. At the top, you'll see the commemoration of 1908, and then in 1958 and 2008 was the last commemoration. And in two of them, you'll see a rather interesting handmade wagon, which is called the Troetelwagen, or the block wagon in English. And this was originally used because transport was so dear to get their products to the market. And it was subsequently used in many of the Germans' commemorations, mainly because it is now seen as a symbol of the diligence of the Germans. At the bottom was the 2008 commemoration. Here you can see the Troetelwagen today on display at the Amathole Museum. There's only two of them still in existence. One is in East London Museum and the one is with us. And this is just a bit of advertising for the museum. This is a second edition that we've brought out, which originated from the 2008 commemoration. The booklet sells for 100 Rand plus postage, and electronic copies are also available for overseas clients and can be purchased through me. So there you have it. I've advertised it officially. The second group I wanted to talk about was the Cape Mounted Riflemen. The museum serves as repository for both the CMR and the Frontier Armed and Mounted Police. Just bear with me, I'm going to read this out. It is important to differentiate between the CMR Imperial and the CMR Colonial. The Imperial CMR was originally raised as the Cape Regiment in 1806, with the officers being British and the other ranks Khoi or coloured. In 1827, the Corps, known as the Cape Corps, was reformed as the CMR Imperial and served until 1870, when it was disbanded in England. The Colonial CMR was raised in 1855 as the Frontier Armed and Mounted Police and deliberately changed its name to that of the older Imperial CMR Regiment in 1878. In 1913, the name changed again to the 1st Regiment, South African Mounted Rifles, which was disbanded in 1926. Since King Williamstown was the headquarters of the Colonial CMR for most of its existence, the museum serves as repository for its objects and memorabilia. Quite a mouthful, but there you have it. Our holdings include paraphernalia, nominal lists, an extensive collection of photographs, and absolutely fascinating copies of the Qaqamba newsletter. Qaqamba is the Xhosa word for cricket, the proper word. They also sometimes refer to ikrekiti, but Qaqamba has got a direct connection with the CMR and with the forage helmets that they used to wear. They also, one would presume, saw them playing cricket and was fascinated by the game, but that's all conjecture. Lastly, our holdings include information on Eastern Cape missionaries and mission stations. This is an image of staff and pupils taken in front of the main building of Lovedale Institution. We have a huge Lovedale collection. Photographs alone, we were actually checking the other day, we have over 600 photographs of Lovedale alone. We also focus on the products of missionary work. Here is an image of the priests and teachers at St. Barnabas Mission, which is at Plaza in the Transkei. It's close to modern day Ingcobo. And they're in front of a Wattlendorp church stroke school dated 1894. What I love about this image, and you'll notice behind the head of the priest to your extreme right, is a beautiful Gothic inspired window. It's lovely to see that in such a simple Wattlendorp building. Okay, this is a specific interest of mine, female missionaries, which includes the wives of the missionaries like Isabella Lang of Burntill. She was the wife of Reverend James Lang. And we also had mission teachers who played a huge role in the Eastern Cape. And this included Miss Storrock of Peelton. Peelton was the first girls' school in the Eastern Cape. So she was a real pioneer. And also Miss Ogilvy of Mgwali Mission. the interesting thing about Miss Ogilvy, or maybe one of the interesting things about it, is that we have no idea what her first name is. She's always referred to only as Miss Ogilvy. They haven't received the attention that they perhaps deserve in the historiography, and certainly not in our files. Their writing, for example, is an important and often unexplored source of information on 19th century Eastern Cape. I might just add that these images from our collection is not available anywhere else, and it's just really lovely to be able to see them all together, but of course I'm completely biased. And this is just to give you an idea of the biographical files on Eastern Cape missionaries at the Amathole Museum. In the 1970s, when we started to collect on missionaries, all South African missionaries working on the African continent was included. Since the 1990s, mainly due to staff shortages, we have been focusing on the Eastern Cape only. But our information on South African missionaries working in Sudan, Nigeria, to name a few, remains as part of the collection. As a result, we now have a wonderfully rich and relatively unknown collection of missionary-related objects just waiting to be discovered. So now you know where our focus areas are. Two questions remain. How do we sort our collection? And secondly, how do you obtain access to it? This is an image of what our, I'm not really sure what to call this, but the title page maybe of, as you go into our database, what it actually looks like. And it's just to give you an idea. On the left, you'll see the objects database. So there's the history section, anthropology, and photographs. History and our photograph collection, it's quite large for a local history museum. We have about 80,000 objects. Anthropology is also a very special and much smaller collection. They have about 5,000 objects. On the right is what we call our genealogical charts. And I really want to talk about how that developed and exactly what it contains. And would love to hear your input in that regard. We started in 1997, when I started at the museum, with the burial register and cemetery surveys. We, in the 1980s, with the disruption of the German settlements because of the creation of the Ciskei, two volunteers, Ms. Waters and Valma Meyer, went out to the German settlements all over the Eastern Cape and started recording the cemetery surveys and brought it to the museum. We put it on computer. Then we started with the King Williamstown burial register. We had a wonderful typist here at the museum who loved putting this on computer, just basic MS Access records. And so we completed the King Williamstown burial register from 1865 to 1972. That was 48,000 records. And then we had another volunteer, Anne Etchcombe, and she was doing cemetery surveys, non-German ones this time, in the Eastern Cape, and we added her information. There is no genealogist currently working at East London Museum, so we've taken that on as well. And we are assisted by surveys that were done by Colin Levy. And so we can use them to try and assist our East London clients as well. What I want to emphasize here, however, is the role that the volunteers have played in putting this wonderful information on computer and to give people access to it. This is just an example of part of the original burial register of King Williamstown. It's quite interesting. It gives you the name of the people, some of the details, their parents. Then there's also the address, the year, how old they were when they died. Very interestingly, it tells you what they died of. We've had some people coming in doing research on family strands. Sometimes there's, you will know this, but sometimes there's these illnesses that are in specific families, and so we've assisted with that. It also tells you what denomination they were, and who buried them, and the exact burial site is also on the burial register and therefore on our database. Then we started with the newspaper index. Again, this is before my time. We had volunteers painstakingly going through all three our newspaper collections, and we now have biographical indexes of all three of them, and it is now available on our database. Of course, the Germans had to feature. We started with the British German Legion Register, which we had a photocopy of. You know, I love paper-based copies. Technology is a wonderful thing, but the original register is actually at the Lutheran Church in town, but they unfortunately lost it. But we have a copy, so the information at least was not lost in the process. We also added shipping lists, like the one of the Caesar Godefroy that you can see on your screen. And whatever literature we could find on the Germans, I've added 2 there. And I've also included the later settlers, because I think they form part of who we refer to as the Germans today. Okay, this was a very interesting project that we did a few years ago. The Bethany Emmanuel Baptist records. Most of the Germans who came out were either Baptist or Lutheran, and we were given the opportunity to borrow 1 record book at a time from the church so that the records can be transcribed. The challenge was, however, not only to transcribe the records, but also to correctly translate the documents, which were written in Gothic German. Wonderful records because they contain the birth dates and places of origin of the original settlers, which are simply not available anywhere else. You might have noticed, interestingly, that the records also include members who were excommunicated from the church and the reasons why, which makes for rather interesting reading. The example I've put on the screen there for you is a lady by the name of Beckerman, just trying to find her surname there. She was excommunicated because of a relationship with an unbeliever. The verdict is out as to exactly what that means, but certainly it would have referred to the fact that the person was not a Baptist. And then the one at the bottom, a Ballman, she was excommunicated on the 23rd of May, 1875. Sure, it was a very specific incident because she left the gathering as she was disobedient. So one could presume that she did not have permission to leave, and then when she was asked to stay, she left anyway. I must just add that many of them were readmitted after a while to church membership. So that's just as an aside. We've also included local directories. Some of you might know about red books. It's really in the days before the telephone, directories. We have select editions at the museum, and we were concerned about them being used quite a lot. And so it's better to put them on a database so that you can keep your mother copy, you know, sound. We've also included voters lists, wonderful records, because it contains often people's occupation and the address of where people lived, especially if they weren't homeowners. And this is often quite a nice way of determining where they lived. We've included an index of our extensive map collection. And also, as people donate family trees to us, we've been cross-referencing that for easy access. We've also included an index of Lovedale past and present. It's actually a published register, which is now rather rare, of about 2,000 students from Lovedale and their details. Wonderful collection. Also, we've included the Cape Mounted Riflemen, as I've mentioned, and a few years ago, we had a volunteer that was very keen on our copies of the Church Chronicle, and so she added the names of the priests and ministers that was in the Church Chronicle from 1900 to 1920. Marriage records. I mentioned the British German Legion and how they were mass marriages on the eve of embarkation. The authorities were very concerned, however, that the correct hands were always joined together, and if indeed all the marriages were legal. So proclamations were brought out with the names of both husband and wife, and they're wonderful records. So we've added them. We have the Hebrew Synagogue Marriage Register, which we included. And then there's just other examples. Again, people coming and donating things to us, and then we added to our database. We have the Presbyterian Stadtreim records and also the Anglo-German Church, which is in the neighboring town of Stadtreim. Just wanted to include this interesting image of a triple wedding of the Archie and Nickelbein family, which occurred in 1922. Okay, then the collection, and one sometimes forgets about this, but it's so important. The collection is also a very important resource in terms of genealogy. We have a very good collection of Bibles. Many of them have people's family trees. And I found over the years that museums and institutions like museums are very good places to actually donate family Bibles to, because then everyone has access to it. It's available and looked after. Interesting image, Michael Tessendorf and his 10 sons. Michael Tessendorf was the original settler. He had a total of 23 children from 2 wives. His second wife, Ernestina Kreklau, had 18 children. These are naturalization papers of Julius Otto Tesmer, dated 1865, which included taking an oath of allegiance to Queen Victoria. Genealogical records are often included in family Bibles, as I've mentioned, this just being an example of that in German. We've translated all of them. We had, again, volunteers assisting us with that over the years. Our photograph collection is a very exciting and obviously quite visual way of looking at history. Trading stations like mission stations form part of the Eastern Cape's historiography. This one's particularly interesting. You can see the little mission station at the back. But what I find quite interesting here is the fact that they're obviously preparing to go somewhere with what it looks like a transport wagon, because they're preparing to yoke the oxen. You can see the guy busy there with the yokes. We also have individual records of people. This is a beautifully decorated Lutheran church record, which belonged to Daniel Lenz. He was born in 1854 and was confirmed in 1869 by Pastor Kluwer, who was the pastor of the local Lutheran church at the time. Maps are also very interesting genealogical references. We have quite a good collection, and when I was doing my PhD research, I really fell in love with so many of these maps, and we often forget how much information it contains. Here specifically, this is actually from my research. I used an 1895 map of what is now the Eastern Cape to pinpoint the exact spot of the great place, meaning the administrative as well as where he was living, of the Tembu King Ngangeliswe. So there you have it. Diaries are also wonderful and quite precious resources. This is a specific one on Amelia Gropp. She was the wife of a British German legionnaire, and she wrote in 1913, she was the original settler, when she was living in Johannesburg with her daughter. Quite a few pages called Some Leaves Out of My Life. It's, yeah, there are many other diaries in our collection as well. And then just lastly, these are examples of heirlooms held in our museum. And I thought it's apt to end with some of my favorite ones. The one on the left is the door sign and Union Jack from the Cape Town home and surgery of Dr. Jane Waterston. She was a missionary at Lovedale and subsequently became South Africa's first female doctor. When we were taking this image for the presentation, one of my colleagues mentioned how few hours she worked. I don't know if you can clearly see it, but hours 9 to 10, 2 to something p.m. and then Wednesday only for an hour, and then didn't work many hours, but actually this was only for her elite clients. She used the money that she obtained in that way to actually assist the poor in Cape Town. She was in her 80s when she was still assisting in that way. A wonderful and very interesting woman. Her letterbooks are available through HIPSA. In the middle is a rare copy of the Sir Harry Smith Medal, awarded to Piet-Jan Cornelis as an unofficial military decoration for bravery following the siege of Fort Cox in December 1850. Smith at the time was governor of the Cape of Good Hope. This medal, interestingly, was found by a farmer when he was ploughing a field. Quite interesting. On the right is an early example of what we call German print, or Amagermani. It's a kappie or a head covering worn by the Germans. It was made in Great Britain, but the fabric has now become synonymous with African culture and specifically with newly married women, referred to as makoti. Yeah, so there's always a wish list in museums. The Lutheran Church is in King Williamstown. It's a walk-in safe. The Lutherans went through a lot of trouble with the disruption of the German settlements to bring most of the Lutheran records into one area, which is now in the St. John's Lutheran Church in King Williamstown. But there's a lot of concern over access, but also in terms of if something happens to it, there should be copies made of it. Catholic Church, same story. The British German Legion members, many of them were Catholic. Not all of them were, of course, German. Some of them were from Belgium. Some of them were from France, from Austria. And some of their records actually are contained in the Catholic Church. The other claim to fame is that Percy Fitzpatrick, the author of Jock of the Bushveld, was baptized in the Catholic Church in King Williamstown. So yeah, any ideas that you have of what we should be doing, what you think we might be doing wrong, or what we might be doing correctly, any volunteers, I would be very interested in hearing from you. There's my details. Please do send me an email, especially if you think I can assist you with your Eastern Cape relatives. We would love to hear from you. And thank you for listening to me.
First of all, thank you, Stephanie. It was very enlightening. I have an interest in the CMR, the colonial, the second reincarnation. And if I understood you correctly, you do have a lot of records of them. The reason I am interested is my great-grandfather, he enlisted in London in 1899 with the CMR, and I've been trying really hard to find records for him. I've used the South African research. I'm in Melbourne, Australia, so it's a bit difficult to get to some of the places. I've used De Walt Nel in South Africa to do a lot of research, military research for me, and I've managed to get files from him for about 30 of my different relatives, so that was really great. But I don't have much on my great-grandfather, so sort of you know, what sort of records do you have? Would they be covering a lot of the individuals, like maybe medal sheets, things like that, or is it just the general history of the regiment as a whole?
Yes, on the CMR, we've got an incomplete nominal list of the Cape Mounted Riflemen. But it's mostly, we have a lot of, as I mentioned, our photograph collection is rather big, and that's all been computerized, so it's easy to access it. There's also references. Sometimes it's in passing, sometimes it's a little bit more than that in the newsletter itself. Send me an email and we'll see what we can find. I can't promise it will be fantastic. I understand that there's a lot of CMR records in the Cape Archives, the Western Cape Archives.
Okay, right.
There's a, I don't want to advertise anybody's services, but Anne Clarkson should know about that. Yes,
well.
She's been helping us for many years. She should know about those records. There's of course no obligation, but I'm just saying that would be great if you can contact her. But send me an email and I can see what with his full name, variations on spelling, that kind of thing, so that I can do a full search. I can't promise, but we can at least try. Maybe there's a photograph of two waiting for you. You never know.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was very interesting. Now, I'm so glad we've got the recording, because I'm going to sit and listen again in my own time. And we really appreciate you coming through to give us this talk and tell us so much about your museum. But as I said earlier, I think we are all a little bit jealous because we're not in the middle of it. You can lock us up there, and we will have a field day for a few days.